Kerajaan memutuskan untuk melaksanakan perintah kawalan pergerakan.
Excuse me for getting, but these things I do see, I've forgotten if they're green or they're blue. I hope you don't mind, I hope you don't mind that I've put down in words how wonderful life is now you're in the world.
Amazing grace, how sweet the sound that saved
주말에도 집에 머무시는 게 좋겠습니다. 그리고 또 중요한 게 손을 자주 씻어야 된다는 거겠죠?
Wash your hands, do-do-do-do-do, wash your hands, do-do-do-do-do, wash your hands, do-do-do-do-do, wash your hands.
Clean hand, clean hand. Pray for people and peace.
Jom join aku masuk pertandingan buat music video raya Together in the Garden.
Pasti dapat hadiah. Apa
100,000
ringgit?
Oh, kalau macam tu, raya kita tahun ni jadi raya yang paling best.
Nice.
I nak jadi lead singer. Suara aku sedap, so aku nak jadi lead singer juga. Masing-masing ada agam sendiri.
Aku pandai main gitar, kau tahu.
Tekan gitar. Gila suka.
Tetapkan langkah dan arahmu, sebarlah semua warna dunia. Jika kau rasa ingin kembali, ku akan sentiasa ada di sini. Jika kau rasa ingin kembali, ku akan sentiasa ada di sini. Di ruang mimpi.
To our topic of discussion today, and didn't realize that COVID-19 could inspire such creativity and ideas in the global, worldwide, right? So, all right, with that in mind, let us move on to our panelists. So our first panelist is Dr. Chow Ow Wei, holds both master and PhD degrees from UPM, and he is actively engaged in academic researches that focus on cultural musicology, virtual ethnography, digital cultural studies, and visual anthropology. He has contributed numerous articles on wide-ranging topics, from Buddhism-related music to popular culture, online media, and current affairs. And he has gained teaching experiences at Xiamen University, UPSI, and he is now currently teaching in the music department, the Faculty of Human Ecology, UPM. He teaches related to ethnomusicology, musical research, media publication, and interdisciplinary research. And recently, he has successfully chaired the UPM Colloquium on Music Research and is now currently working on a research project under the FRGS Ministry of Education in Malaysia. And having developed a very multidisciplinary career pathway in which he has played roles as educator, researcher, newspaper columnist, editor, translator, photographer, graphic designer. So he has thus cultivated very a vast interest in research areas related to music, culture, religion, humanity, as well as scientific ways of knowing. So yes, we very much look forward to your presentation, Dr. Chow, and now the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Camellia. Okay. As of today, there has been an accumulative infected global population of nearly 69 million with terrifying mortality of over 1.5 million, while billions of people mourn for the loss of family, relatives, and friends, and mentally suffer when coping with the outbreak. Many have gradually realized that this pandemic has not just posed a mortal threat to public well-being, but also an indicator of subsequent devastation to economy, politics, and social lives. In the combat of COVID-19 containment worldwide, government instigated a precautionary cordon sanitaire at various degrees. In the situation as experienced in Malaysia, when the Movement Control Order, MCO, took effect on the 18th of March in order to contain the contagions and to flatten the curve of this viral infection, many businesses have ceased operations at extreme measures of the lockdown restrictions, while the authors witnessed a devastating reality of having closed schools, deserted streets, blocked tourists, unoccupied hotel rooms, and cut airline routes. The economy at its worst, especially with the retrenchment exercise practiced by corporates, and many contract workers and freelancers were literally out of jobs. By then, there were more than 1/3 of the world population living under a form of lockdown restriction, and there were more than 25 million jobs at risk. The closure in regions and the imposed isolation that even avoids physical contact among humans are bringing impacts on businesses in the longer term. And some analysts believe that, unlike the global financial crisis in 2007 and 2008, it is not likely to return to the normal state. Among the many vocabularies to grab fast in new updates, many fickle meanings have been suggested for an ambiguous future state called the new normal. Being obliged to not engage with social activities at public places, civilians are forced to be isolated in any form of quarantine and overwhelmed with strict measures to the extent of prohibited social gatherings, restricted traveling, and the cancellation of festive celebration. Apart from the business and tourist sectors, the COVID-19 disruption has essentially affected the creative industry. In compliance with the restriction on social gatherings, traveling, and festive celebration, live music, dance, cinema, theatrical shows, and on-site film festivals were either postponed or cancelled with no compromise at first, and slowly resumed from the tightest measure. In the global scene, program concerts, gigs, and shows were cancelled or rescheduled with a clear and present uncertainty that the dates are still susceptible for a revision in future. As of the COVID-19 pandemic has shaken the foundation of globalization, the global scene of creative arts with collaborations of artists and filmmakers of different nationals, from gigs to festivals, was deeply impacted. To name a few, the Glastonbury 2020 and the 2020 Cannes Film Festival were cancelled, while the Tokyo Summer Olympiad 2020 and the Dubai World Expo 2020 were rescheduled to 2021. Globally, In the vulnerable time of COVID-19, the most immediate problems faced by precarious creative labors are immediately felt, especially in securing their basic needs for daily survival. Due to the temporary lockdown declared by most countries, closure of concert halls and performance spaces, as well as film productions, were stopped, and cinemas were closed due to safety measures in flattening the pandemic curve, if not reducing its wider spread throughout the world. Since the worldwide lockdown started, did music performance, live concerts, film production, music and film festivals halt entirely during COVID-19 pandemic? What were the transformations in the music and film industry? Seeing COVID-19 pandemic as a global crisis significantly, the pandemic has caused creative destruction in the music and film festival, which forced the creative labors to reinvent and recreate themselves through virtual space. How do creative labors, which comprise art directors, musicians, performers, film producers, film production crew, film festivals director, and programs partake in the creative processes in reinventing themselves during the COVID-19 pandemic period? In the face of COVID-19 stroke, two key concepts are applied in this discussion: disruption and regeneration. Inspired by the research work of Buckley and Ward, the idea of destructive change immediately emerges in the sense-making of human lived experiences that could be visited in the post-COVID-19 era. First derived within the business management community, disruptive change refers to a sudden shock that quickly and irreversibly changes a company's expected future, challenging existing business models, values, and norms. And shocks for these events include economic crisis, 9/11 attack, or an innovative competitor that disrupt the market share balance. Apart from the business community perspective, this idea of destructive change is applied to a wider scope on the changing geopolitical, technological, socio-economic, and environmental trends, and their motivators over a period of a decade or two. Other than checking whether informants saw a destructive change, positively or negatively, three major disruptors were identified: money, fear of the future, and shift into the global political economy. This qualitative study adopts mixed methods of autoethnography and virtual ethnography in order to gaze at the disruption and regeneration processes triggered by the COVID-19 outbreak in 2020. And ethnography is a scientific study of culture with a concern of descriptive documentation of the socio-cultural relationships within a given research environment. However, like other civilians in the country, the authors, we abided by the MCO enforcement and were once limited to the mandated stay-at-home request for a few months, and were restricted from physical contacts with respondents and informants to a certain extent. So autoethnography and virtual ethnography emerged to be the most appropriate option to approach the data of the subject. Autoethnography is described as a way to conduct traditional ethnography with a significantly enhanced role for the researcher, who is visible, a strong member in the study of the culture itself. Conducting differently from the conventional ethnography, ethnographers also take part in the construction of meaning and values in the studied culture, while the reflexive nature of research involves self-observation within a social or cultural world to which they necessarily belong. Virtual ethnography, or alternatively known as ethnography for the E3 Internet, is understood to be the most effective approach to embark an ethnography without establishing an actual physical connection with a field site and the informants, calling E3 as the embedded, embodied, everyday internet. Christine Hines has even dispensed with the epithet virtual in order not to mislead the way this method is understood. She elaborates some key components of this type of ethnography, where the attributes of field and internet and the role of responsibility of ethnographer are adaptively defined and reconstructed. While the ethnographer were in a cordon sanitaire, voice telecommunication, the internet and the applications of social media, conference room software has been the research tool which were conveniently available and manageable for the purpose of this study. Moreover, informants were selected according to their credentials, such as practitioners in the creative arts industry in Malaysia, as well as an established connectivity with the researcher. With this methodology, this discussion intends to present macro and micro perspectives on the creative arts in the light of the COVID-19 impact as a destructive change, and an observation on how practitioners and artists transcended from the destructive setbacks to a regenerating phase. So this discussion will be continued by my fellow speakers. So that's my part. And thank you very much.
Right. Thank you very much, Dr. Chow, for your very insightful presentation. So next on, we shall move on and invite Dr. Connie Lim. Dr. Connie Lim is a music lecturer who teaches music appreciation, music theory, music history, and research methodology. Her research interests are popular music and traditional music of Sarawak. With her book Sape, Alat Music Sarawak, published in 2016, she hopes to document and sustain the legacy of Sarawak cultural heritage. Since 2017, she was appointed as a panel member for the Intangible Cultural Heritage Performing Arts Committee under the Department of National Heritage Malaysia. She's an adventurous person who loves traveling and hopes to explore different parts of the world. Yes, Dr. Connie. So now let us have Dr. Connie Lim with her presentation.
Yes. Thank you very much, Dr. Camellia, for your introduction. Okay, as Dr. Chow just mentioned about the impact of COVID-19, many musicians actually have lost their jobs, and if you look into creative labor as a creative arts practitioner as a creative labor, and the nature of the job in the creative industry were extremely precarious. Many creative labor actually work independently as a freelance artist, musicians, performers, music producers, concerts or festival crew, and production crew, while working on their own until the accomplishment of a project. For example, as a performing artist, the output of a job does not produce a tangible or a physical product. It is visible for society to realize their challenges faced by the musicians. If we were to examine the artistic life prior before the pandemic, the musicians have been constantly searching for gigs from time to time through collaboration with different institutions and individuals. Due to this precedented crisis, it had caused opportunity loss, reduction of opportunity due to the creative labors. All these losers will not be able to recover in a short period of time. There are musicians who have lost their job, due to cancellation of concerts, touring, and are shifting to another industry in order to earn a living to support their family. During this research process, I've conducted an interview with Elena Murang, who is a software musician, as she expressed to me during the lockdown, all the live shows and music festivals were cancelled. I actually had beautiful shooting plans overseas which were cancelled too. Now, even live events, we don't know what is going to happen next. So now, we're doing a lot of virtual shows and I perform on Instagram Live and Facebook Live. Lockdown had affected my income. Through the anecdote that I just read just now, it is clear that musicians and performing artists like Elena Moran have suffered financially during the beginning of COVID-19 pandemic in Malaysia. Since the lockdown, there's no performance opportunity. Immediately, musicians, performers, and artists have started to turn to live streaming as a new performance space. Coping with a performance space, whether it is a concert hall, cathedral, open spaces, or private home, the absence of audience from the venue has meant great challenge for the musicians in communicating their musical ideas to the audience, as well as capturing audience's response through their applause and emotional resonance. For Andrew Wong, who is a Malaysian film composer who currently resides in Los Angeles, as what he shared to me. While working from home, I'm still able to collaborate with performers and soloists, composing and producing music for them. Getting things sound right commercially is extremely essential for our music to be heard nowadays on YouTube, Spotify, and various music streaming platforms. It's a new social experience where musicians, composers, songwriters from different parts were connected through internet and online collaboration tools. It creates a platform for internationalization, global dialogues in music, collaboration in music making through local and international connection during the lockdown period has made it possible. A lockdown period could also be transformed into an opportunities for the arts practitioners during the global crisis that bridge the connection between composers, songwriters, musicians from different parts of the world. While being isolated at individual homes, it is seen that musicians, artists, and performers created their own opportunities through community building. Breaking the record of YouTube viewership in the first 24 hours of live streaming. The live streaming of Duomo di Milano by Italian tenor Andrea Bocelli on April 12, 2020 had created a historical record on YouTube history for classical music. In this historical event, where 30 minutes live stream concerts were viewed by 2.8 viewers on real time, and he had created 28 million viewership from global audiences in the first 24 hours after the premiere. The theme, Music for Hope, was closely related to COVID-19 pandemic. Bocelli was standing on the altar, singing alone and accompanied by organists. It was performed in a poignant space where there was no audience in the empty cathedral. From April 13 until July, this video had received more than 40 million viewers globally. What makes Andrea Bocelli is the live stream a global phenomenon? As written by Faculty of The vocalist Bocelli himself doesn't see this performance as a concert, but instead, it is a prayer where he hopes to convey the message of love and hope to the world during the coronavirus pandemic. As an audience viewing through YouTube streaming, if one could imagine standing alone at the altar inside the enormity of the empty cathedral, listening to the resonance of sacred music, it symbolizes the gravity of Italy under lockdown. Analyzing the choice of live stream performance venue and Bocelli's gesture of taking an exit from the church, there's an interpretation of meaningful messages. The Cathedral of the Gothic architecture style was the largest church in Italy and the most prominent landmark of Milan, the capital. It's the most prominent landmark of Milan, Italy, which has immediately become a COVID-19 epicenter in Europe since February 2020. The 33-second silent scene of a blind man coming out from an empty, enclosed, darker space to the front pavement under the sun demonstrates a powerful, symbolic act of hope of worst hit Italy during COVID-19 stroke. Coherently, commenting on Bocelli's live streaming concert, it's transcended religion, nationality, age demographic, and even music preference on its way to becoming perhaps the signature cultural event of the pandemic. Due to the pandemic, the church will be empty. There will be no congregation during the Easter Mass. Hence, this live streaming of Easter Day symbolizes solidarity and how music unites people for a community to humanity across the globe through live streaming. Although applauses by audience could not be heard, a worldwide audience has shifted to the live stream platform during COVID-19 pandemic period. As observed on YouTube on the Bocelli Music for Hope live on Roma di Milano, over 25,000 netizens responded through the public comments published on YouTube and Twitter. Responses to Bocelli concerts on social media testify the power of music streaming and how audiences associated their emotions, feelings, and sentiment to the music. Sound Pagoda, the 12 Sounds of Wuhan, Wuhan 12罗 by Tan Dun, in February 2020 had created an intercultural dialogue between China and worldwide amidst the exponential spike of the coronavirus hit in Wuhan, the COVID-19 epicenter in China. The music scoring of this composition was scored for 12 tam-tam, 12 violins, 1 viola, 1 cello, comprising both Chinese and Western musical instruments, incorporating both elements of music with harmony in life. The sound of 12 tam-tam resonates the 12 sounds of Wuhan, and the text sung in this composition were written based on Laozi, philosophy and wisdom. The composition was first premiered on February 2020 in Belgium. Since the control of movement has started in Shanghai, China, the restriction and lockdown measures had brought disruption to the orchestra and ensemble's practice routine and performance schedule. In order to stage this composition, musicians, artists from different locations were connected remotely through 5G internet technology. All performers were musically united through cloud network in the performance. Through the cloud collaboration of 5G internet connectivity, it has created a possibility and rejuvenating an ensemble performance through virtual collaboration. As observed, the conductor gestures and the aspirations of the conductor, Tan Dun, the sound produced by each individual musician, and the musical interpretation, which includes pitch, tempos, dynamics, and phrasing, could be seen and heard clearly throughout the performance. The virtual performance was streamed from New York, Shanghai, uniting musicians from 12 different countries, including the United States, China, Russia, Japan, Bulgaria, France, South Korea, Norway, Germany, India, Turkey, and Israel, where the composer Tan Dun conducted the piece through cloud conducting. During the live streaming performance from an empty concert hall on April 12, 2020, the conductor Tan Dun and one tam-tam player were surrounded by 11 LED screens displaying 11 musicians performing each individual sections. Locally in Malaysia, the music industry had been silenced entirely by the lockdown brought by COVID-19 pandemic. In fact, many musicians had reinvented themselves by collaborating with other musicians in seeking opportunities to reconnect with their potential audience virtually. In my interview with Elena Moran, she shared that during MCO, I've done live concerts through YouTube, streaming at Jiaoding. It's a bit similar to like doing TV live show, like the breakfast show on TV. But the way it's different is it is a performance. You don't hear audience clapping. You don't get feedback from the audience. Even though you are doing a live show, you get feedback from the host. It's like a nice closure to the song. That was really strange, but I get used to it gradually. I started to do an Instagram live show during the lockdown period. When I started, I felt very awkward, but I'm used to it now. As a live performer, you get a lot of energy from the audience. There's like freezing into your energy and on stage as well. You just have to find your energy with the band. Well, from the sharing, it illustrated how musicians like Elena Moran have swiftly reacted to COVID-19, as seen in other parts of the world. Musicians were forced to reinvent themselves to collaborate with other musicians and production crews in streaming their performance and gigs on digital platforms. At the same time, using social media to publicize. All creative labels have invented themselves to become a content creator in order to monetize through platforms such as YouTube, Instagram, and Facebook. While negotiating the post-pandemic period intertwined with the ever-changing social culture, political economic ramification of society is still an unknown aspect where future research could be an attempt to further discuss the development of the creative arts industry during post-pandemic crisis. While nevertheless, the phenomenon as in music, as later my colleague going to share about film industry, is worthwhile being documented as well as facing burning question in examining the current precarity state of creative level and creative collaboration of music performance and their derived opportunities through music streaming on internet during the global pandemic. Thank you. Over to you, Dr. Camellia.
Right, thank you. Thank you very much, Dr. Connie Lim, for a very in-depth sharing of performers and musicians' creative outputs and activities during the pandemic COVID-19. All right, so again, I would like to remind our audience, and invite you all to submit any questions you may have for our 4 panelists in the Zoom chat box or even on our FB Live comments page. And we will try to answer all your questions during the Q&A session after our last speaker, yes, at the end of the panelists. So next, we are happy to invite Mr. Yow. All right, Mr. Yow Chong Lee. He is a film lecturer at Universiti Malaysia, Sarawak. And apart from teaching and researching, he curates for several film festivals and programs in Southeast Asia, including the longest running short film festival in Malaysia called Mini Film Festival. He is currently developing a documentary series for TV broadcast and has been given a precious opportunity to co-produce and host Director's Cut, a TV talk show that features the finest filmmakers in Malaysia and beyond in discussing their creative process, worldview, and life. All right. Mr. Yow, he enjoys nature and had recently picked up scuba diving actually. So he hopes to gain more weight and most importantly, wisdom in life to be shared with the people around him. So yes, now please, we can't wait for you to share with us, Mr. Yow, your insights and knowledge. So I pass it on to you.
All right, thank you very much, Dr. Camellia and everyone in the floor. I would like to share the slides. Let's see. Okay. All right. Okay, as my colleagues has already shared on the music industry in general, I will be talk through about film industry before and during COVID-19, regionally and also in Malaysia in that. So in overview, I will be giving a quick look into the regional and Malaysian film industry from production to exhibition. And then I will be talking also the freelancers and their precarity and also the resilient funds, assistance and any kind of help available at the moment and anything goes wrong with them. So I would like to go through one by one. So let's start with the first one, from the production to the exhibitions. But just before that, I would like to give some scenarios with the ground, like what actually happened during COVID-19 and how does that actually impacted the film industry as a whole. So generally, if you can go through the IndieWire, one of the trusted website about film news, there is a page that actually provide a very extensive list of cancellations or film, TV shows and events affected by the outbreak. I would say more than thousands of events and film, TV shows which were affected, like film festival affected by the outbreak, were all listed down extensively in that page. You can just go through that. And then on another note, we have reports from The Guardian, for instance, at least 170,000 people in the US and the UK lose jobs as film industry grinds in hard due to the coronavirus. But this number is actually very, very small in comparison to the staggering number of 650,000 in the Bollywood. And I would say more and even more in the China. So yeah, so you can imagine how big the impact was. And meanwhile, in Malaysia, we see some like postponement of film festival and even the cinema has to be closed and from November onwards. But that was actually happening far earlier. But this is a newer piece of news. So that was the scenario. But return back to the first things that I want to talk about is the film production and the consumption. Generally in the region, Southeast Asia actually is one of the having the remarkable growth of film productions and also consumption in the world with about 655 million of people in Southeast Asia, which is about half the number of Chinese and also half the number of India. So it somehow provides a very good pool of audience who are ready to watch film and also to consume film. And at the same time, over here, we become the so-called story or content mine for Hollywood and streaming giants such as Netflix, HBO, who had actually set their headquarters of Asia headquarters in Singapore in order for them to somehow look for content which can be turned into their so-called original local content. So you can imagine how much we are actually attracting people coming over to Southeast Asia to somehow mine our contents and seek for our stories. And at the same time, it's very sad as well. Most of the time in Southeast Asia, or most of our film viewing are predominated by Hollywood mainstream cinema. Just a quick look into websites, like you can just search for that. Mainly, this country in Southeast Asia were having box offices dominated by Hollywood film. But in some spatial exceptions, we have Indonesia, Vietnam, and Thailand. In certain years, they have their own film dominated. Particularly, I would like to highlight Indonesia, Vietnam, and Thailand. But the rest of us, like Brunei, Malaysia, the other countries like Myanmar, most of the time our films are not so much being watched in the cinema in comparison to Hollywood. Okay, so there's the general look of that. But that is the things that happening. But how about during COVID-19? So during COVID-19, as we know, the global film industry had been halted. And the production and the closing of cinema was happening. And just about the lockdown were kind of like being eased, many production were kind of like, okay, let's go and do our shooting because we need to make money and we need to make content so that it can be shown to people. So in return, they are being asked to comply with SOP. For example, they need to make sure they have sanitizers. They couldn't really give food in the buffet style. It has to be packed. So this actually incur more costs and lesser crew and cast. Because they want to cut costs, they reduce, like for example, assistant directors. Normally they will have 2, but now they might cut into only 1. And then the cast, they will make sure they only take 1 or 2. So in other words, there are more and more people losing their job in that sense. So in a production, maybe they will have about 20, 30 to 40 people, but now maybe they will only have about 20 people. So it's like lesser crew, lesser cast, so they can comply to the SOP and also cut the cost. So you can imagine the impact of COVID-19 to what the production is at the moment. And we also observe a lot of production are tended to be animation based and also maybe like I would say collage home video style kind of, as you can see from the visual and also the video that we had shown earlier on, like this one, SMK Raya Dekat Jauh. So it's actually kind of like you see visual where they combine kind of video call style in that. All right, so that is my observation. And at the same time, you also see the film distribution and consumptions inclines towards streaming services. Like, for example, CNA had reported Netflix see record signs up during COVID-19 lockdowns, and the Malaysian Reserve had also reported increasing streaming subscriber signals viewing preference. Interestingly also, at the same time, you see the giant Netflix also came into the pictures by buying and also a lot of local content. For example, they buy some art house film, Jagat, Crossroad, 1 2 Jaga, and some very mainstream film like Munafik, Hantu Kak Lima, Pasca, and even animation like Agent Ali, Upin dan Ipin, all those kind of film. And recently they added in one very interesting film, I would say, is Putri Gunung Ledang. So you can check it out. So you can see how the content in the streaming services, they are now they are so much hungry towards our content. They are looking for local content, original content, which can be produced and even just bought and then screened to the audience. At the moment, they are like buying, but soon I would say they are going to produce local content. All right, so just to feed the hungers of the audience as well. So at the same time, film exhibition and consumption were very much like online, and cinema also go creative. For example, the film festival that I run and with the students and colleagues in the campus, mini film festival, we had to postpone our festival due to the COVID-19, and we were kept in the very uncertain situation. Should we run it? Shouldn't we run it? Should we do it physically or should we do it on site or online? So it is very much a very uncertain situation, and I would say uncertainty kept us anxious in that sense. So I would say film festival workers as well as many other workers in many other fields were in that anxiety mode, and that was also contributed to a health issue, mental health issue, for instance. And at the same time, we also try to cope with the situation because we know we couldn't really go physically on site. So we go online. So for example, one of the webinar that I organized and I hosted, being the moderator, I invited 5 other panelists from around the Southeast Asia, from Myanmar, from Thailand, from Malaysia, Indonesia, and Singapore to come together to talk about how are they going to face it. Wow, actually, I would say my festival was the first among these 5 festivals that actually ran into virtual and half partial virtual in a later day. So my festival was around July. So it's actually very challenging, and we have to think of how should we program the film, what kind of film should come first, and will the filmmakers are willing to share their film with us, because whenever we show their film online, they will have the consideration that will their film be accepted in other film festival, especially for a film festival as small as we are, compared to those big name film festival, Alice Film Festival. So we had this big challenge when we want to do it online. At the same time, they would actually prefer to send their film, these filmmakers would prefer to send their film to those big name film festival like Cannes, for example, or Berlin Film Festival, for example, instead of they want to send it to a small festival like us in this region. But maybe Singapore Film Festival is actually bigger than us, right? So that is some scenario that we have. And then we also observe a very innovative approach by, for example, Jogja NetPac Film Festival, Asian Film Festival. This year they had re-innovate themselves by having the festival not only organized in Jogja itself, but this time around they have it in 15 cities across Indonesia. So it's actually a very innovative way where, while you couldn't really have a big festival, you are now collaborating with your local partners, and these local partners will be the one who organize the festival at the local destination or the venues, either virtually or physically. But in Indonesia, they in a way they have a smaller number of audience, but in a lot of locations. So actually this practice were already practiced by Malaysian Freedom Film Fest. If you know about this festival, it's very interesting because they have a screening with local partners like in Johor, in Penang, in Sarawak. So they are actually organizing smaller screening across Malaysia for that purpose. So this innovative approach, I would say, can be one of the reference for us in the future. And in Watan Film Festival in the Myanmar, they also have this living room cinema where you are seeing the picture at the bottom left, where a group of family members and friends sitting together to watch a film that they had actually asked the permission from the festival in order for them to access the film, and they can watch in their own pleasure and peace at home. So it's very interesting that they have this kind of idea in order for them to reduce the number of infection, COVID-19 in the country. So they innovate the way in order for them to share the film, the love of film to more people in this innovative way. All right, so that's the cinemas. So we have cinema that actually went into like, for example, drive-in cinema in Malaysia and many other countries like US, Korea, so many other countries. But I would say it's not really practical for Malaysian because due to the weather and the temperature, so it's not so conducive for us, and the price can be very, very expensive, like about 100 ringgit per car. So it's not so practical. And I would say after I just recently went into check on their website, they had stopped their services, and it was actually initiated around July, but now when I check it, I think they have already closed the service. So you can imagine how not practical they are, and they couldn't really sustain themselves. And meanwhile, you also see some local cinema going creative, like they do rental of their cinema halls for maybe some spatial screening, or even they sell their popcorns online, some merchandises online. But my question here is, at what cost that brought by this COVID-19? And I would say quite a number of staff were actually retrenched. and being shaken out, becoming unemployed in that sense. So that brought me to my next topic or subtopic, which is actually the freelancers and their precarity. As mentioned by the Ministers of Communication and Multimedia, Datuk Saifuddin Abdullah, actually about 80% of production crew in Malaysia were very much being paid daily. So they are kind of like a freelancer type, and they are not being paid constantly. So it's like daily basis. So that is actually a very precarious condition where their jobs are not being recognized formally. They don't really have EPF unless they paid it for themselves. They do it, they fork their money for that. And very much irregular workloads and not getting paid on time. So that is kind of like the laments that we hear from the freelancers. And sometimes their wage rates are also being compromised and having significant gap in professional growth after they involve as freelancers. So those are the things that we involve for freelancers, and that actually before COVID-19 were already like that. But you can imagine with COVID-19 happening, their situation are getting deteriorating, kind of like more getting worse in that. Like for example, we have Columbia Journalism highlighting COVID-19 highlights lack of financial safety net for the freelancers. And also, you also hear like the film industry, the advertising industry also ask if they can start their production. Otherwise, their workers are starving. So kind of like if they don't get the money, they will not be able to survive. They will not be able to feed their family. And also at the same time, they are being exposed to COVID-19. So for example, one of the reports was cast and crew members of 6 people were actually tested positive for COVID-19 after they have their production. So it's challenging at the same time. They might not be having the money, they might be unemployed, and at the same time they are being exposed to health risks if they were to go into production. So it's a very challenging time for these filmmakers and crew. And like for example, as I say, actually Malaysia had this EPF. If you are willingly paying the money for yourself, you fork out the money so that you can put into your EPF, but it's on voluntary basis. So if you are not doing that, very likely in the end of the day, you are not getting any money for your retirement. So it's very challenging, I would say, because our Malaysian law doesn't put that in as compulsory for the freelancers. And BBC has also reported recently, I think last year, EU law has fixed minimum rights for gig economy workers. Like for example, if you were to work as freelancer in the EU, you will be made known of when the payment will be made. And let's say they are paying you late, what kind of punishment will be upon this employer? So this is very interesting to see how EU had already came to realizing how important to take good care of the freelancers. Instead of in Malaysia and most of the Southeast Asia country, I would say Singapore had kind of like done something about that. So yeah, we are seeing some changes happening on the ground, and let's see what will happen next. And okay, the last but not least, I would say this is the part that I would be also very interesting to talk about. It's about fundings. So you have all these kind of problem around with people couldn't really go on ground to shoot, and now they can shoot, but they are having exposed to health risks and many other things. And these fundings are coming. So it's kind of like, all right, I'm helping you now. So don't worry, you can go for shooting now, right? But you know, let's do some simple comparison. I'm sorry for the Singapore, it's not Singapore, it's Singapore. So in Thailand, we have about 1.1 million for 1920. And Indonesia, we have about 289 million for 2021. And in Singapore, they have about 6 billion allocated in 2018. That is not this year amount, but that was 2018, means 2019. They have this 6 billion ringgit allocated for the Ministry of Culture, Community and Youth. And they even have this very interesting fund called Cultural Matching Fund, where you when it's actually like very encouraging for the organizer or the organizing committee, the arts committee, whenever you have anything to do with your arts and culture events, and whenever you could somehow get any funder or sponsor, like let's say they are giving you $1 million, the Singapore government will also top up another $1 million for you. So that is actually culture matching fund, where we become more proactive to contribute, to get the money ourselves in Singapore. So it actually inculcates that kind of independency instead of dependency. All right. So having said that, let's compare to Malaysia. Okay, in this 2021 budget, the tourism, arts and culture, we have about 1.1 billion ringgit, and the communication and multimedia, where the film and FINAS were parked under, having 2.3 or 2.4 billion. Okay, so that's the number that you can imagine. And this year, our budget, or for the next year one, we actually, most of the budget are going into education and health because of the COVID-19 so-called. So my concerns here, if you can see, we have, out of this 1.1 billion for tourism, arts and culture, 1.14 billion, we have only 15 million for arts development. It's actually a very, very small number, while Cendana was so happy saying, okay, we are very happy with the amount of money, while you have 1.14 billion, which is actually about 10 times more than what, like 100 times, I would say. Yeah, my calculation is not correct, so you can do your own calculation. So the number is so small compared to what we have for the tourism part. But for arts, only 50 million. You can imagine how less it is already. And at the same time, for MDEC, we about 100 million for digital content, like mainly for animation and some digital development. Meanwhile, for film industry, there is no clear indication, probably because they are yet to be approved yet by the parliament. So we will see how much they are actually allocating it for film industry and FINAS. And meanwhile, actually, they have Penjana, the so-called resilience relief fund, so that this film industry will be able to sustain themselves with 225 million boost for creative industry. It is a very big amount of money announced this year because of COVID-19. And recently, around end of November, 40 production companies were announced receiving 13.9 million from FINAS to help them to sustain themselves to do their production. Okay, but my question here, I think it's very important to address is how much is enough, and has anything gone wrong? From my observation, for me, this funding is actually a very good funding, very good number for amount of money being given. But in the end of the day, it actually fosters a very dependent culture where the film production house will always lament. And we also hear the association, the filmmakers lamenting that we are lacking of funding. In fact, there are already a lot of fund. So you can see this dependent culture is already kind of like rooted in these people. And So that's why I suggest we should actually somehow learn from others. Like for the Singapore one, they have this cultural matching fund. Whenever you get some money, we give you this same amount of money. So it's like, you want that money, you have to work it out yourself, that kind of effort. All right. So fundings are less inclusive and not in trend with the current needs. For instance, recently they announced there is one funding for OTT platform. So whenever you produce a super tele, which will be screened on Astro, you will be getting the funding. So the question here, how many people are actually watching Astro now, right? So many people are actually opting for Netflix, iFlix, View, and many other bigger platforms like Amazon Prime, for instance, instead of they watch Astro. So I would say, you have the money when you are trying to help, but the help isn't really go into the correct juncture, correct recipients for what they really need for. And that doesn't really in trend with the current needs. And so that's why it comes into the final points that not addressing the bigger pictures of structuring a healthier industry. Okay, meanwhile, I would like to highlight all this opportunity, which I think is actually a very good platform for all the Malaysian filmmakers. But in fact, there are quite a number of independent producers went around to this film festival, and they actually secure some funding from them, like for example, the Amanda film, who is actually a female Malaysian independent filmmaker, whose producer has secured some funding from Singapore co-production grant, and also I think from Hubert Bosfon, Rotterdam, for instance. So these are all the things that we should actually encourage. And in Malaysia level, most of our festivals are very much awards based. They're giving awards, come celebrate, we give awards, but they don't really have these so-called markets where you can encourage people to pitch good ideas so that people outside of Malaysia would like to co-produce with you, and where you can actually get money. But in that sense, you need to make sure your ideas are good enough in order for people to come in and fork their money, to put their money to co-produce with you. So that is the thing that we should actually in need for. That's my opinion. All right, I would say thank you to everyone for your attention, and thank you for listening. So let's treasure the uncertainty. It's actually a very uncertain time, but as it renders challenges, it also offers opportunity. So thank you.
All right, thank you very much, Mr. Yow. Yes, I very agree with you. It's an extremely extraordinary times. Yeah, extraordinary times calling for some creative challenges. And thank you for your wonderful presentation. It was interesting to see the sustainable efforts being taken by the film industry in our region to maintain and retain some kind of production in the film sector, right? Yes, thank you very much.
Thank you.
So now we move on to our last presenter. Last but not least, we are very delighted to welcome our Prof. Madehud. Previously, he's in UPM from 2012 to 2018, actually. But now Prof. Made is a professor of ethnomusicology at the Tainan National University of the Arts since 2019. He also serves as the director of the Research Center of Asia Pacific Music of Tainan National University of the Arts. He holds a PhD in ethnomusicology from the University of Cologne in Germany. He has published many articles and chapters on the topic of ethnomusicology. So now we shall invite you, Prof. Made, to begin.
Okay. Can you hear me okay? Hello? Can you hear me okay?
Very loud and clear, yes?
Very loud and clear. Okay. So, mula-mula saya nak ucapkan banyak terima kasih kepada rekan-rekan Universiti Putra Malaysia di Faculty Ecology Manusia atas undangan hari ini untuk ikut serta sebagai responden dalam rangka intellectual discourse. Karena saya tak lepas dari mantra UPM, yaitu berilmu berbakti, saya hadir dengan senang hati untuk mendukung my colleagues today. So, thank you very much, Chow Wei and others, for the invitation. The title of my paper today is The Next Normal in Creative Arts, a Response. And I borrow this term, next normal, to kind of forecast into the future. Our last three papers have told us a lot about what has happened now. So let's reflect on what's going to happen in the future. So I'd like to highlight the following points for discussion. First, given that temporary workers have lost their jobs during the pandemic in the creative arts industries in Malaysia and many other countries, what are the implications of new income sources where artists actually increased their income during COVID-19? Second, I'd like to discuss issues of equity and access. Given that all the presentations today have dealt with creative artists who have been isolated but have access to the internet, what about those isolated artists without financial means or who suffer from physical or mental disabilities and lack internet access for collaboration? Is equitability very important for this regeneration discussion that we're having? Finally, I'd like to discuss the positive aspects of live streaming mentioned earlier and how the next normal or post-COVID time should be a time where creative artists collaborate on healing communities devastated by the pandemic. So, the first focal point identified by my colleagues in the previous three papers in the creative arts sector was the precarious laborer. According to Chandana's survey, 93% of respondents employed in the creative industries were negatively impacted, and 76% of income generating activities such as exhibitions, performances, and public events that we've heard about today were postponed or canceled. The film industry, music business, theater productions, and dance centers all employ temporary contract services for lights, sound, staging, pre and post-production editing. We have script writers, makeup artists, and musicians all in this kind of precarious situation. And of course, middle and upper tier managers, directors, and administrators often work full-time and have steady incomes, but they too were dramatically affected. So it's important to highlight, though, that the so-called precarious laborer has been conditioned to volatility long before the appearance of COVID-19. So historically, performing artists often hold down several part-time jobs. They moonlight in retail, restaurant, or other service industries and are generally conditioned to instability. If there's one thing predictable in the arts, it's that income can be unpredictable. For example, research in ethnomusicology shows that, for example, in Kelantan, wayang kulit puppeteers or Sumatran randai singers or even Balinese temple dancers, they all have day jobs. So most artists have been conditioned to volatility, and that's the point I'd like to make here. So in fact, it's no wonder that, as Connie shared with us earlier, that the Sarawak Sape musician, Alena Murang, was quickly able to adapt to virtual shows. Alena, as a performing artist, made very quick kind of transition from performing shows for an audience to kind of that empty room audience of Instagram Live, Facebook Live, and she was even raising money for charity and deriving a modest income from the Ministry of Communications and Multimedia, as I understand it, through a program called Music Dari Rumah. Okay, so that idea of conditioned volatility. Considering the disruption and regeneration of creative artists, I propose the following question. How many creative artists conditioned to volatility have actually increased their income during the COVID-19 pandemic? Remember, because media technology tends to funnel attention to the most liked videos, viral content, and content with the most views, the next normal may see previously precarious laborers become stable income earners online. For example, Dahmer and O'Connor, in their recent article, reported an increase in revenue among indie musicians during the pandemic in China. Before the outbreak in Wuhan, indie groups like post-punk band Romo performed for small audiences in large cities through a network of underground live houses. Live houses attract small audiences and a subaltern clientele. With the close of live houses, live streaming became a new outlet hosted by Bilibili and Alipay and WeChat e-payment platforms. Indie bands now are no longer limited to live house performances and modest incomes. Founder of Yu Lin Tang, Shanghai's oldest live house, was quoted as saying, quote, "During the pandemic, some musicians have earned more income online than they had done through live performances. This is because streaming platforms pay for live performances as good content filler, 70% of which goes to performers," end quote. Okay, I'd like to turn now to a second point raised by our three presenters concerning isolation and collaboration. Our three presentations this afternoon have emphasized how collaboration among creative artists has continued despite the most people going through periods of lockdown. So despite the loneliness during the during the movement control order, musicians, film composers, and even dancers have shared audio and video files with countless terabytes of data uploaded to servers via 4G and 5G and broadband internet. Indeed, the 10-minute video shown at the start of today's session showed several examples of creative artists collaborating. From Italy, we saw Italian opera star Andrea Bocelli sing a kind of poetic narrative of disruption, suffering, and isolation. Filmed at the Milan Dome Cathedral, Bocelli's solitary voice filled the vast empty spaces of the cathedral grounds, pulling on the heartstrings of YouTube viewers. Now, another Western classical music example saw a collage of cell phone video clips from cellists, violinists, and trumpet players playing in their bedrooms, kitchens, and balconies. The individually recorded clips were carefully edited together, and shots of empty city streets, deserted public spaces, kind of added to this somber message of the ongoing pandemic. So the examples are full of collaborative ideas that have great potential for the next normal under discussion here. In the next normal, COVID, isolated artists can continue to collaborate remotely. Dancers in Germany or India will continue to choreograph complex movements and upload them to the cloud for dancers in, for example, Taiwan or Australia before rehearsal. Malaysian film composers like Andrew Bong mentioned previously will continue to communicate with clients, performers, and animation companies through his digital audio workstation. And of course, UPM will continue to host online symposiums like this one that we're doing today. However, it's important to point out that these mediated social experiments in creative arts collaboration all have one very crucial component in common, and that is access. Access to the internet has been critical to creative arts during COVID-19. So much so that without it, no one shares anything. Bandwidth determines how fast files are uploaded. A modern computer or smartphone determines how good our Zoom connection is. The assumption in the next normal idea that I'm trying to share with you today is that access to the internet is a global phenomenon. Online collaboration assumes creative artists have the financial means to access this kind of data-hungry next normal interaction in the first place. As social theorist and ethnomusicologist Thomas Torino argues in his article, Are We Global Yet?, access to the World Wide Web raises issues of decolonialization and equity between the global North and the global South. Indeed, under the current pandemic, the disparity between internet users remains strikingly disproportionate. According to Statista.com, more than 33 million people, or about 10% of the United States population, does not have access to the internet. That's 33 million people in the United States don't access the internet. Malaysia has similar access disparity of approximately 10%. And more than 40% of the world's population does not have regular access to the internet. So considering issues of decolonialization and the global South, it's important to note that the subjective view that creative artists will collaborate in classical music, film scores, and dance in the next normal is primarily the view of the wealthiest and most industrialized creative artists from the global North. Equity and access also implicates an entire demographic of creative artists who struggle to be productive in front of a computer screen for hours and hours because of physical and mental health issues. As music therapy tells us, and I'm reminded of my colleague, Dr. Indra, those who are visually or physically impaired, those who suffer from depression, attention deficit disorder, or even social media anxiety and bullying, do not succeed in a mediated World Wide Web where collaborations among creative artists require access. Now, that's all on a kind of negative note. On the positive side, though, the current pandemic has forced these precarious labors in the creative industries to come up with tremendous breakthroughs in collaboration. I turn now to the final point raised by my three colleagues today concerning the significance of live streaming. Live streaming has the potential for real regeneration, healing, and creativity in the post-COVID world. As we saw in excerpts from Sound Pagoda by Tan Dun and Playing the Piano for the Isolated by Sakamoto, solidarity, unity, and cohesion in times of severe disruption are achievable when we decide to regenerate ourselves in the post-COVID world. The creative possibilities presented in live streaming have great potential. Musicians and dancers, theater people, film composers, we all have shown us how to create content that binds us together in times of crisis. The potential for regenerating societies through live streaming ourselves to each other is encouraging and full of healing potential. Think of how many families who've lost their loved ones to COVID, depressed business owners who've gone bankrupt, skyrocketing unemployment, and single mothers who are now homeless, all because of the pandemic. With live streaming of creative arts into the homes of devastated societies, creative artists can continue to entertain, inspire, and lift the spirits of communities in need. I, for one, am optimistic that the regeneration of creative artists in the next normal involves regenerating society, breathing new life and spirit into people's lives and in new and creative ways. Who would have thought that people now specialize in working as virtual art exhibitors? Who would have thought that there are now creative artists making a living live streaming performances? And the fact that many creative content creators work from the comfort of their own home. Indeed, in the next normal, we can all be a bit more comfortable online, so long as we don't forget how important it is to also be there for each other face to face as creative artists. Thank you. I'm finished.
Right. Thank you very much, Prof. Made, for your excellent sharing session here. Very in-depth and knowledgeable presentation on the outcomes of the COVID-19 or the performing arts, respectively, right? The pros and cons of the COVID-19 towards the impact of the performing arts around the world. And so, yes, we have heard from all four distinguished panelists today. And so we shall continue into the question and answer session. So yes, I'd just like to remind everyone to please continue to type in your questions for our panelists. But in the meantime, maybe I would have one thought and comment from Prof. Giza here. So maybe we can address this for everyone in the panel. Yes, so she likes to refer this to as not exclusively the issue here towards the creative industry exclusively, because yes, so the one thing her concern is the virtual world will have to contribute to very radical changes we may not be able to imagine at this point in history. So I would like to know more about the visions for the future instead. Yes, so maybe our panelists would like to further enlighten us about what are the visions or the foreseeable future of the arts in research, in industry, and everything. Yes. Anyone would like to start first? Prof. Made or Dr. Chow?
Prof. Chow, it's over to you.
Right.
Okay.
So maybe
I'll offer a comment, and then we'll
yes.
take it all around. First of all, I want to say thank you so much, Prof. Giza, for the question and your presence today. As many of you know, Prof. Giza was our mentor at UPM for several years. She was a great advocate of exactly what we're doing now, having intellectual discourse, and she organized so many conferences and forums for doing exactly what we're doing, having a debate about things. And it's an interesting point that she's raised here about the whole question of industry, whose industry, and I think that does kind of get us to think back to you know, who profits and who doesn't from you know, the efforts that are going on now during COVID-19. Mr. Yow, you raised a very interesting point about, for example, Netflix also being very hungry, as I mentioned, but they're hungry for content. As you said, they've set up an office in Singapore. So we're going to see things like this as a dramatic restructuring, if you will, of traditional ways that creative artists reach an audience. And maybe I would just remind or add this to the discussion that any media, right, the core word of media is mediate. And mediate means to get in between, right? One source and another source. And media gets in between, okay? So in an industry world, of course, this refers to kind of a dollars and cents exchange. Even though platforms are free, discussions are free, and everything like that, there's still a mediation that happens. So in the creative industry, kita harus waspada, ya. We have to be aware of these mediated experiences that we have. So I'll leave that as my comment.
I see. All right, thank you very much. Maybe, yeah, to keep the ball rolling, I have a question for Dr. Chow, probably. Like, as an anthropologist, a social researcher, right? Usually, most of the time, you require face-to-face field work and observations to conduct your research. And actually, social research has been conducted online for many years actually before, with our internet, yeah, and online resources. So do you foresee virtual ethnography, that's your area, right, as a very important alternative source of research material in this, you know, unprecedented pandemic times? It is becoming more significant and vital?
Thank you for the question.
Yes.
I used some methods on virtual ethnography for my PhD studies. So I have a little experience with this, but I can't really say that I'm quite an expert in the field. I can only say that the vision that I have is that I see that this technique or this method is becoming significant, and especially during the pandemic time, because of all these restrictions and limitation that researchers that are forbidden to to get in touch physically with their informants and respondents. So the term virtual ethnography is actually has been in the discussion since the 1990s, but back then it has some other names, like multi-sited ethnography, and then virtual ethnography, and I think nowadays people would like to call it digital ethnography instead of virtual ethnography, because of the viewpoint that virtuality is actually part of the reality, as we have this the advancement of communication technology. So but we have a lot of challenges if we are to insist that virtual ethnography or digital ethnography is the way to go, because we have still quite some conventional thinking that it may not be well established because of certain ambiguity, I would say, in the settings. So the ambiguity is often discussed on the part of field number one, there's a field. Where is your field? So conventionally, we have the physical geographical location and a boundary on a setting on the place what we call field, where we can get into this field physically. And the internet can actually has already break through all this boundary of space. I would say spatial characteristics. The second characteristic is the temporal characteristic, which is the timing, the time. So so with digital ethnography or virtual ethnography, we used to we have to deal with remote communication tools through the remote communication tools like there is no specific time of so-called interview, so we can just like post a question last week, and today we get the response from feedback from our respondents or our informants. So, and then it is also very hard to have a start point and an end point of this timing. So there must be a new concept of time if we are to implement this digital ethnography. And another challenge is the identity of the informants and respondents, because in the internet world, we know that some of us may have some real identity and maybe virtual identity on the other hand. So how can we define this virtual identity? Not to say that it's fake, but like because this is because that's the need. That is the need of modern day communication. So so these are the few challenges that we may need to discuss and also be confronted. And digital ethnography somehow is I think thanks to the pandemic, that because of this kind of critical time, that ethnographers are to have another eye or another view on this method to conduct a research. So there has been quite a number of sharings online since the pandemic this year. That's the ways of conducting ethnography by using the internet means. So I can't really say like it has a bright future, but I can only say like it has quite a good possibility to expand its practice in this digital era. Next.
Yes, thank you very much, Dr. Chow, for a very detailed response there. And I like to express Sumani Ismail's comment. Appreciate the presentation. You have to be creative in whatever field as new norm in teaching, as well as reaching the public. Yes, right, creativity. That brings me to Dr. Connie Lim. She mentions that now the production of the online collaborations and compositions or productions, the film composer has mentioned that he now thinks about commercialization in his musical products, where he has to attract the viewers, the online viewers. So are these online collaborations and digital collaborations in terms of the cultural music side, like Alina Murang, I think, yes, is this kind of steps towards modernizing traditions, and what steps are at the same time taken to maintain the authenticity of this cultural music aspects? Yes.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Camellia, for the question. I think it's as I observed during this pandemic, as a lot of features, for example, like Hungry Ghost Festival, that falls in the mid-July of Chinese calendar, could not be performed. So I've seen some cultural activities, as an example, Chongke or Zhanjian. taken the initiative and together to raise funds, and then they've managed to raise about 52,000 in order to get this tradition, actually to help this practitioner to keep going with this culture with a little bit of funding through crowdfunding given by the public. And then the video that the production actually was broadcast via YouTube is a way, not only during this pandemic, to help this arts practitioner to continue their practice, but in another form, in virtually. But in another way, I see this has opened another opportunity as people are staying at home, it's time to rediscover what our culture is. I think I've also seen, local musicians, quite a lot of collage videos have been produced. Like Asmil Yusno, and they also work together with some traditional musicians, and then like Nemwe, and then it's time for them to collaborate. Is how actually to bring out the essence of the culture, and it's also for each, not only creativity, but how arts, music, I think film could be, continue during this pandemic. And then it's also not only as response to the question. I think as we academic, in terms of teaching, we also have to be creative. How we actually we got to be very fast to turn our classroom and then to virtual classroom, and then it's how we actually engage our learner in the process of teaching and learning process. Yeah, over to you.
Yes, that's true. Thank you very much, Dr. Connie. And we have another question here from Geraldine. Yes, so she saw a virtual performance, and she knows it's not real and impossible, but it was very well done. So it seemed real that it was performed by this performer. So how can we know whether the performance is real or fake? And what if the general audience won't know the difference? This is quite dangerous as well. So what can be done to ensure genuine virtual performances? So maybe she meant like a recorded live performance, or it was fully 100% live performance, I think. So maybe we can have this question to Prof. Made and Mr. Yow. Yeah, your comments on this, live performance and recorded live. So there's a preference. I know this is a personal preference.
Well, I'll just echo what Dr. Chow said, and that idea of virtual, and then I think he provided us this definition that I've written down by another scholar, to say that users are now so embedded, right? And they embody the experience of what we see on the internet. So this kind of word virtual really doesn't apply anymore, doesn't it? It's really, as you said, not virtual ethnography, but digital ethnography. And so what is real and not real now, it becomes kind of quite blurred. So experiential or embodied experience through recorded performance, virtual performance, live performance, dream. What are, we're talking about existential arguments here. But I think suffice to say that, whether something is authentic or virtual is probably presents kind of maybe a rather kind of simple binary that really needs problematizing in between, especially when we're talking about something that, again, that is the virtual experience as an embodied experience. It becomes very embedded in the life worlds of people who consume. So yeah, I'll throw that over to Mr. Yow from your perspective, but those are my comments on it.
I had never made something like that, but I believe as our progress in that sense. Many of us are actually being exposed to that. Like when we watch film, for instance, a lot of time those are actually made in CGI and they were actually computer generated images. And we kind of like made believe, and we believe that there's a kind of like true and real in front of us. So the so-called boundaries of real and fake are actually kind of being blurred in that sense. And we are kind of very happy with that somehow. But yeah, if you are looking for real and fake, I guess that is, I would say that is not really the question to ask now, because that is getting more and more blur and getting more and more, I would say, rampant at today's age. Thank you.
Can I throw just 2 points from here? Is that I think the first point is that how can we define danger? So it's like why do we think this dangerous? Is it because like it is harmful to ethics, or it is harmful to the aesthetics, or what? Or what kind of value? So, or what value has been threatened? So, I think that this is one point that as an audience, as a learned audience, I think we need to think about that point. And I think the second point is that no matter is so-called real or fake, or so-called fake or half fake, or almost fake or almost real, or whatever terms it is. So I think it's good, like if we are a learned audience, it's always good to know the process. We have to understand that how it is being produced. So what was in the process, or what was the new element that is added in, and maybe that is a breakthrough when we see it deeper. So yeah, I think these are 2 points that I would like to offer to any questions like this at this moment. Thanks.
Right.
Right. Yeah. Thank you very much to the panelists for a very conducive answer. Yes, as our audience, maybe we're looking for content, emotion, some kind of connection, and now we have to be quite informed on the production side, you know, to appreciate what we are watching or listening much more. Yes. So now we move on to Fang Wang. She says, how can we use the traditional ethnographic methods to observe and participate in the live stream musical activities? Because people lose the physical connections during this situation, so might challenge the instrumental performance experience. So yes, again, I open to the floor. Yeah, anyone can chip in with any ideas to yeah, how to observe now with maybe a slightly different method.
Can I just offer one perspective? Yeah, it's very difficult. It's very difficult for conventional ethnographers to practice the way the ethnographic ways that we used to know. So let's look at it as a new, with a new eye, and of course, like with this new understanding, we need to redefine our methodology as well. So I would suggest that there is one study called phenomenology, or the phenomenological hermeneutics. So these are 2 methodologies that we may incorporate in the ethnography that we studied in, because the another keywords is again virtual ethnography or digital ethnography. The second point is that we may use virtual ethnography or digital ethnography because the role of ethnographer has been redefined because like the ethnographer is both the observer and also the participant in this process. So perhaps like this is a kind of new methodology that I can recommend to be integrated in your study. Thanks.
All right. Thank you very much, Dr. Chow. And sorry to everyone about the sudden interruption there. Not quite pleasant. But anyway, maybe any more questions? And okay, before we end, maybe one final question for our film director. Mr. Ya, how long do you see this thing will take time for the industry to recover? And yes.
Okay. Thank you for the question. I believe it's very much a similar answer that will be given by many people. As long as the vaccine isn't there, we will not be able to resume to the so-called back to the normal. But I always appreciate this moment, because for me, that is a very good time for us to reset, to rethink, and even to ponder what are we really in need for now, and what are we really in need for the future. So I actually very much appreciate what COVID-19 had brought us. It's very challenging for many of us, for families, for parents, for filmmakers. And I also see quite a lot of filmmakers who are actually using their time to rewrite their script, to restructure their script so that the script can be tightened up, and then it can be pitched to more people. And I actually also appreciate this moment where we see a lot of film festival, a lot of organizers are actually coming together in order for them to organize events, film festival, which I guess is more matter to more people in that sense, where you are bringing community together. So I really appreciate this time. If you ask me if I would expect how long it is, if I may, maybe it's like about half and 1 year, but to resume back to the past, I guess that is not what we should look for. We should actually look for a more inclusive film industry, for instance, something that more variety, diversity in that sense, with more contents coming from Orang Asli community, from LGBT community, for instance. So these are the things that we should actually look for, and we should have actually have that environment to create and foster that. That's my opinion. Thank you.
Well, thank you for your ideas and opinion, which is actually quite connected to our last question here by Mr. Murali. Hi everyone. During MCO in Malaysia, the entertainment and creative industry was disrupted. Local music industry artists create calling to the TV and radio stations to play more local content so they can still earn royalties. However, the response is poor from the stations. So what is the panel's view about it?
Well, I'll just chime in and say, there's lots of disruption with the COVID-19 to some industries, but some industries are steadfast and they don't change at all. So I think your telecommunications industries, despite all the good intentions, often do not respond to things that will, in their view, not generate the type of revenue or attract advertising. So, I think in times where they're trying to cut corners and so on, supporting local artists may not be the agenda of mainstream media. And I think the person who asked the question is very probably experienced firsthand what it means to be denied in that sense, to be denied from the industry. And I think that echoes the whole idea of disruption technologies, because if mainstream media is not going to be responding, alternative medias will. And as Mr. Yow said, then there are alternative voices that can have a platform. And obviously now in the time of the pandemic, people have been forced to find a way to channel a voice, if that's indeed what they want to do. And if the kind of existing establishment doesn't allow that voice, then artists will find another way. And historically, that's been the case. So I think, this kind of next normal will involve a lot of platforms that we're seeing during the COVID time become more key players, especially for, I think, local artists. Certainly the forum that we're on right now, which is having a virtual conference, I believe future conferences will not go back to, you have to spend thousands of money to fly to a conference in Europe. You're going to have an integration of both formats in some way, shape, or form. And my point about access and equity, then we hope that these platforms will create more access and equity in that regard. That's my comment anyway.
All right, thank you very much.
I just have one point. I may need to contribute one point that I think like most of us has already noticed or observed that the pandemic time is actually a time of selection. It's also a time of elimination, which means like the old has to be eliminated and the new styles comes in. So I guess like this is happening not just in the creative industry, but also in many sectors and also in the academia as well. So I guess like this is if we look at it from the big picture, from the big picture is that it's just that the artist or the creator has to be always be innovative and also be reinventing yourself from time to time, because no one can just survive without improvement for years. Thank you.
If I may add, I'm not from the music background, but I'm from film and media, TV kind of things. But I guess COVID-19 actually provide a very good timing and platform and for us to negotiate between these people, between TV station, between the exhibition and like cinema. They are actually, in fact, hunger for content, and they have no content. If they have no fresh content to provide, they're actually in the danger of being wiped out from the so-called industry scene. So that, in the end, they have to somehow bow down to the producer. Could you please make content for me? And the content has to be good content. Like, for example, cinema has to be closed down in Malaysia, partly because there was no fresh film being released in the cinema. And it came to a point in Malaysia that this cinema were talking to the filmmakers in Malaysia, asking them, could you please share your film with us so that we can can screen your film? So it come to a point that all this while they were actually looking down to Malaysian film. They don't want even screen Malaysian film. If they were to screen, they will only screen it in a very not preferable time, like lunchtime or 11 o'clock in the morning, for instance. So now they're actually looking for contents to be screened in the cinema and even in the TV stations. So I would say there is actually a very good timing for producer and audience to negotiate these, to come to a somehow equal playing ground together. Instead of all this time, the cinema, the TV station were the one who say everything. They are the boss. So I would say I actually appreciate this moment provided by COVID-19. Thank you.
Right. And with that, I think we've come to the end of our session, discussion today for this afternoon. Very big thank you to Professor Made, Dr. Chow Ow Wei, Dr. Connie Lim, and Mr. Yow for your very delightful presentations, very insightful sharings. And to our audience, thank you for spending your afternoon with us. And yes, before we go, let's have a group photo. Yes, that is quite important as well, for some remembrance. So if you all would like to on your video cameras, so we can have a nice picture with our speakers.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you for coming.
Hello, hello.
Yeah,
lots
I
of
can
familiar
wave,
faces
smile,
now.
pose.
And yeah, We have,
yes,
we have
familiar
audience
and
from
new
all over
faces.
the world.
Wow.
Okay, who's taking the picture?
Right.
In
Yes,
1, 2,
I'm taking
smile
this.
everyone. 1,
Okay.
2, 3. Okay, another one.
Okay.
Okay, 1, 2, 3. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Thanks a
All
lot.
right. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Sorry, I guess we have 3 pages, right? Is it enough to
Oh,
fit
yeah.
everyone in?
Yeah, but
Yeah, we have three pages to scroll. I can see.
Well, they didn't turn on their camera. And
yeah,
only those
not
who turn on their
everyone.
camera will appear in the first page.
Okay,
Oh,
thank you everyone. Thank you, Dr. Camellia. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Okay.
okay.
Right. Thank you very
Thanks,
much.
everyone.
Okay.
Thanks everyone.
Thank you. Have a nice day.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, everyone.